Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the autumn of 1347, and you find yourself standing on the damp, cobbled quay of Messina, a bustling Sicilian port, where the smell of salted fish and ship tar mixes with the sharper scent of garlic from the market stalls. The Mediterranean is restless tonight, the water lapping hard against the wooden hulls of Geno's galleys that have just limped in from the Black Sea. Their sails hang like torn parchment, rigging creaking, ropes groaning as exhausted sailors stagger down gangplanks. The locals crowd close, craning their necks to glimpse men with hollow cheeks and bruised swellings under their arms. No one knows it yet, but Europe's most infamous visitor has arrived, and you, unlucky soul, are right here in the thick of it. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this one. If you're new here, this is when the Black Death knocked. 3047. Drop into the comments and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are, because honestly, wherever you are, your medieval counterpart is probably about to panic. And hey, if you're still breathing by the end of this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. It's the only survival strategy that works against YouTube's algorithm. Now settle in, keep your distance, and let's step into the very moment Plague's knock was first heard in Europe. The story begins not here in Sicily, but further east, on the shores of the Black Sea. Genoese merchants, those tireless shippers of silks, spices, and sometimes trouble, had established colonies along the Crimean coast. The crown jewel was the port city of Kaffa, perched precariously between Mongol power and Italian ambition. It was 1346 when the Mongol army, under the leadership of Jani Beg, besieged Kaffa, and it was during the siege that something happened which chroniclers would whisper about for generations: the hurling of plague corpses over the walls. Some historians argue whether this was truly biological warfare or simply desperation, but the result was the same. The disease spread among the defenders, among the sailors, and into the ships that fled westward. So imagine yourself aboard one of those vessels cramped between barrels of grain, amphorae of wine, and sailors coughing into their sleeves. Rats scurry along the ropes, their fleas carrying the bacterium that science centuries later will call Yersinia pestis. At this moment, though, you don't know about bacteria or fleas. You just notice the stink, the sudden fevers, the blackened lumps swelling on men's bodies. You pull your cloak tighter and pretend you don't see, because what else can you do? The galleys arrive in Messina in October 1347. These ships, symbols of wealth and trade, now bring something unseen, something deadlier than swords or arrows. As sailors stumble ashore, townsfolk stare at the strange boils under their arms and in their groins, the way their skin seems tinged with ash. Panic brews in the marketplace. City officials, recognizing danger, order the ships back out to sea. But it's too late. The plague has slipped ashore like smoke through a crack. You walk through Messina's narrow streets, and already rumors spread faster than fire in a thatched roof. Whispers of divine punishment, of poisoned wells, of some cursed eastern pestilence cling to the air. The bells of churches ring out, not in celebration but in warning, summoning people to prayer, though even priests hesitate to get too close. One chronicler later describes the scene: ships loaded with a cargo of deaths, disgorged men who brought with them a pestilence clinging to their very bones. Within days, the city that had bustled with trade and laughter now echoes with wails. The governor tries to expel the Genoese, forcing their ships away, but the sailors scatter to other harbors: Marseille, Pisa, Genoa itself, like sparks from a fire carried on the wind. As you watch the sails vanish over the horizon, you sense that something irreversible has begun. The disease doesn't march in with banners and fanfare. It seeps in quietly, born on fleas, traded in fabric, passed with a handshake. And while Messina reels, the wider Mediterranean world remains oblivious for now. Imagine the irony. Merchants, who for centuries connected the corners of Europe with wealth and exotic goods, have now connected them with a microbe. The very arteries of commerce become the veins through which death courses. The Mediterranean, once the highway of prosperity, turns into the conveyor belt of mortality. But here in Messina, in this precise moment, you don't know the full scale yet. You only feel the unease prickling your skin as another neighbor coughs, another child slumps in fever, another house shutters its windows. The ships may be gone, but the Black Death has knocked, and it will not stop at the door. From Messina, the infection leaps like sparks on dry timber, carried not only by desperate sailors but by the very machinery of trade that kept Europe's coasts alive. You make your way along the harbor as ships slip away in the dark, their crews gaunt, eyes sunken, bodies trembling under the weight of fevers and blackened buboes. By November, they reach Marseille, and the pattern repeats, unloading not just barrels of wheat and amphorae of oil, but invisible passengers burrowed in the fur of rats, nested in the seams of cloth, hidden in the straw-lining cargo holds. Marseille is one of the busiest ports of Christendom, a city where French wine flows out and Eastern spices flow in. You walk its narrow lanes, stone walls close on either side, and smell the mingling of salt spray, garlic frying in kitchens, and the pungent odor of hides curing in tanners' vats. That familiar scent soon acquires an edge, sharp, foul, almost metallic, as disease blooms in the bodies of dock workers and merchants. Within days, the warehouses echo, not with bargaining but with groans. Sailors, as sailors do, move on. Some head north toward Avignon, the papal city where Pope Clement VI holds court, a place thick with pilgrims and clerks and petitioners. Others sail west toward Spain or north to the Ligurian coast, dropping anchor at Genoa, Pisa, Venice. Each landing is another match to kindling. By December, rumors race faster than the ships themselves. Tales of sudden death, of bodies swelling and darkening, of households sealed off with lime and prayer. You step into a marketplace in Genoa. A fishmonger slams a writhing eel against the counter, the smell of the sea hanging heavy in the air. Beside him, a cloth merchant unrolls bolts of bright wool, his hands already trembling with fever. The voices of buyers rise and fall, but beneath the chatter lies a hum of unease. Already, people speak of ships that reek of death, of ports cursed by what they brought. Genoese officials, fearing panic, ban some vessels, but trade cannot simply stop. Too many lives depend on it. And so the plague walks inland, carried on carts of grain, on the boots of merchants, on the cloaks of pilgrims. In Venice, that jewel of canals and marble facades, the disease arrives by water. Gondoliers sing less. Their voices weaken as passengers cough behind handkerchiefs. The great piazza fills with the smell of incense, as priests carry relics through crowds and hurried processions, hoping to ward off what they cannot see. Bells toll, not for festivals but for funerals. Still, ships continue to come, for Venice cannot live without the sea, and with every arrival, the city sinks deeper into sickness. From the Mediterranean, the infection fans outward. Overland trade routes, busy roads lined with taverns and stables, carry it north. Mules clop along cobbles, their packs laden with cloth or wine, their drivers unaware that the fleas in the hay or the rats in the sacks are more valuable cargo than any coin can pay for. At night, you rest in a roadside inn. The straw mattress smells faintly of mildew, of sweat, of something sour you can't quite name. By dawn, the host's wife is coughing, her skin pale, her hand clutching her chest. You leave quickly, but not quickly enough. News reaches Avignon by early 1348. Pilgrims had walked there to receive blessings, carrying both hope and plague in their shoes. The Pope, advised by physicians, takes refuge in a chamber between two roaring fires, believing the flames will cleanse the poisoned air. The sight is almost comical. An anointed leader, broiling like a sausage, to dodge invisible death, but fear leaves no room for dignity. Meanwhile, Barcelona reels, its alleys echoing with the sound of wooden wheels rolling coffins toward hurried burials. In Valencia, priests chant litanies so often, their voices crack. Across Spain, the disease follows roads like a shadow, striking coastal towns first, then moving inland. By spring 1348, the infection is everywhere along the Mediterranean's edge. From the Straits of Gibraltar to the Aegean, towns tighten their gates, watchmen inspect newcomers with suspicion, and households burn herbs in desperate attempts to cleanse the air. Yet, trade cannot stop. Grain must be bought, wool must be sold, armies must be fed. The Mediterranean, lifeline of Europe, has become its noose. And so you realize the knock on Europe's door was not a single rap, but a drumbeat. Messina, Marseille, Genoa, Venice, Barcelona, all answered, willingly or not. The Black Death had boarded Europe's ships, walked its docks, strolled its markets, and now, like a guest overstaying its welcome, it shows no sign of leaving. You wake to the sound of coughing, the wet, rattling kind that shakes the body and makes every listener glance away. In the cramped houses of Marseille, Genoa, and Venice, neighbors begin to notice the same terrible pattern. A fever that arrives suddenly, as if out of nowhere, followed by swellings under the armpits or in the groin, lumps hard as stones, hot to the touch, and spreading quickly until they darken into bruised patches. You hear whispers calling them babios, from the Greek word for groin. To most, they are just boils from hell itself. You step closer to a victim, and the stench hits you first, a sour, rotting odor clinging to sweat-soaked linens. The sick breathe shallow, their eyes glassy, their mouths cracked with thirst. Some vomit dark blood, others collapse before they can speak. If they last more than a few days, it's considered a miracle. At night, you lie awake, listening to the city around you. Instead of laughter from taverns or the clang of blacksmiths, the air is filled with the groans of the sick, the muffled sobs of families, and the steady tolling of bells. Priests walk the streets chanting litanies, their voices echoing against stone walls, carrying incense that mixes with the stink of decay. Cats dart through alleys, their green eyes glinting in the torchlight, as rats scurry unchallenged, bold with the absence of human order. What frightens people most isn't only the speed of death, but the randomness. A merchant collapses at his stall in the morning, while his apprentice survives long enough to close the shutters. A mother falls ill nursing her child, yet the father who shares her bed seems untouched, at least for now. Rumors spread that touching clothing, sharing food, even breathing the same air might be enough to seal your fate. People hold scarves soaked in vinegar over their mouths, convinced it will save them. Spoiler, it won't. Doctors, those who haven't fled, arrive in their strange beaked masks stuffed with herbs and flowers, believing that sweet smells will counteract the poisoned air. You watch one lift his stick to examine a patient, prodding the swollen buboes without daring to touch. The scene borders on absurd, a figure dressed like a bird poking at death with a cane. But in an age without microscopes, what else can they do? The rich retreat to country villas, convinced that fresh air and distance will spare them. Some flee. So quickly they abandon servants, neighbors, even relatives. The poor, of course, have no such option. They huddle in small rooms, beds crammed close, sickness passing from one body to another like a whispered curse. The symptoms do not come alone. Fear eats at the mind, convincing people that every ache is the beginning, every cough a death sentence. You feel it yourself, the prickle in your throat, the heaviness behind your eyes, and wonder if it's sickness or simply terror. Either way, the line between health and death grows thinner every day. Chroniclers describe bodies that blacken before burial, skin marbled with dark blotches where blood vessels collapse beneath the skin. People begin to call it the Black Death, not because they understand the science, but because color itself seems to drain from life and settle in bruises. The disease does not discriminate. Nobles and beggars, monks and merchants, children and old women, all cough, all swell, all fall. In one street, a baker collapses over his dough, and his neighbors still eat the bread because hunger is stronger than fear. In another, a midwife dies in the middle of a birth, and the newborn never breathes at all. 3 days. That's the phrase repeated in hushed voices. 3 days, and they are gone. Some linger longer, but most succumb within that brief span. Families stop waiting for recovery. They start preparing graves the moment bobos appear. And yet, amidst the horror, you notice strange defiance. Some people drink heavily, claiming that if death is near, they may as well go out laughing. Taverns echo with forced cheer, mugs slamming against tables, even as half the company doesn't return the next night. Others gather for frantic festivals, clinging to joy in the face of dread. It's human nature: deny, distract, drown fear in wine and music, even if the fiddler coughs between songs. Still, the symptoms spread, indifferent to prayer, laughter, or denial. The Black Death does not knock politely anymore. It barges through every doorway, leaves no street untouched, and makes every breath a gamble. And as you wipe the sweat from your brow, you can't shake the thought that your own body may already be harboring the same secret, swelling silently with You sit on the wooden bench of a physician's chamber, though to call it medical feels generous. The walls are lined with shelves of glass jars holding herbs, powders, and dried animal parts. A copper basin of leeches gleams in the light of a tallow candle, their dark bodies writhing sluggishly in cloudy water. On the table lies a thick book, its pages inked with diagrams of humors, stars, and spheres, a reminder that science in 1348 still leans heavily on Aristotle, Galen, and a good dose of astrology. The physician explains, with grave confidence, the disease comes from an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. He suggests bloodletting as a cure, pointing to a chart of veins mapped across the human body, like routes on a sailor's chart. You've seen patients emerge from these treatments weaker than when they entered, pale and trembling. Yet families still pay, hoping the lancet sting might draw out the sickness. Others consult astrologers who gaze at the heavens and declare that the conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in 1345 poisoned the air. People nod solemnly, as if the stars themselves had chosen to align against humanity. The theory of miasma, corrupted, stinking air, becomes common wisdom. Citizens burn juniper, rosemary, and pine in the streets, filling alleys with smoke so thick your eyes water. Some carry posies of herbs in pouches, pressing them to their noses when passing the sick. You try it yourself. The lavender smells pleasant, but the plague continues undisturbed, unimpressed by your little bouquet. Monks in scriptoria copy treatises warning against bathing, claiming that open pores invite poisonous vapors into the body. The irony isn't lost. You're already living in crowded, unwashed conditions where fleas breed happily. Meanwhile, barber surgeons wield their knives, lancing bobas to drain pus, a procedure both agonizing and usually fatal. You watch one such operation. The victim writhes on a straw pallet as a red-faced barber squeezes the swelling, muttering that the poison must be released. The result is blood, pain, and silence. In Avignon, Pope Clement VI hires the best minds to investigate. Learned clerics pore over Aristotle, Galen, Avicenna, and recent Parisian medical faculty opinions. Their conclusion? Corrupted air, celestial conjunctions, and divine wrath. Practical advice includes avoiding sleep during the day, moderating one's diet, and staying cheerful. Easy enough to recommend when half the city is already dead. Some physicians, desperate, invent remedies that border on comedy. You hear of a cure involving sitting between two roaring fires to sweat out the poison, though, unsurprisingly, patients often collapse of heat before play. Another insists that drinking crushed emerald mixed with wine will protect you. Spoiler, it won't, unless choking on gemstones counts as salvation. Charms and talismans hang around necks, inscribed with holy words or symbols of the zodiac. The line between doctor and magician blurs. Alchemists experiment with concoctions of mercury, arsenic, and ground-up pearls, convinced that rare and costly ingredients must hold the cure. Their patients rarely live long enough to complain. Even the most famous physicians fall silent as the death toll climbs. In Paris, medical schools shudder. In Florence, students scatter. Some practitioners flee cities entirely, abandoning patients. Others double down, parading their knowledge in long scholarly speeches while bodies pile up outside their doors. Meanwhile, ordinary people invent their own theories. Some blame foreigners, others blame the sins of women or the greed of merchants. Gossip fills the void left by failed medicine, You hear neighbors whisper that looking at a sick person's face can transmit the disease through the eyes. One woman insists her neighbor fell ill after smelling bread baked too close to a victim's house. When fear rules, logic takes a holiday. And yet, there is a strange kind of order in this chaos. Every city clings to some explanation, however flawed, because explanations are easier to bear than silence. If humors are to blame, bleed the patient. If air is poisoned, burn herbs. If stars align against us, pray for better skies. Even if none of it works, doing something feels better than doing nothing. You watch one physician, dressed in his bird-like beaked mask, shuffle down a narrow alley. Inside the mask, he has stuffed dried roses, mint, and cloves to ward off bad air. His long robe is coated in wax. His gloves are thick. His cane taps the cobbles as he points to patients too dangerous to touch. He resembles not a healer but a harbinger, a walking omen, and yet families beg him for help, clinging to the hope that someone, anyone, understands this nightmare. But the truth is undeniable. In the mid-14th century, medicine is powerless. No bleeding, no prayer, no emerald potion can stop the swelling of buboes, the blackening of skin, the choking cough that follows. The learned argue, the poor despair, and the plague keeps walking, indifferent to all. You shuffle through the narrow lanes of Florence, and the city feels strangely muffled, as though daily life itself has forgotten how to breathe. Where once bakers shouted prices, hammers clanged on anvils, and children chased hoops through the squares, now shutters hang closed, shops stand silent, and the streets echo only with the squeak of cartwheels carrying the dead. Daily life, the simple rhythm of bread, work, worship, crumbles under the weight of disease. At dawn, you'd normally hear church bells calling the faithful to Mass. Now, the bells ring for funerals, tolling so often they blur together, until no one knows who has died or how many are gone. Priests, exhausted and fearful, rattle through their duties quickly. Some refuse to enter plague houses altogether, mumbling prayers from doorways rather than risking contagion inside. Food becomes scarce. Farmers, sick or dead, abandon their fields. Grain prices climb sharply, and those who can't afford bread chew on chestnuts, wild herbs, or whatever scraps can be scavenged. In city markets, stalls sit empty. The smell of spices, cheeses, roasted meats, all the flavors that made towns lively, vanishes. In its place, the sour odor of unwashed bodies and smoke from hastily burned refuse drifts through the air. Craftsmen stop working. Who needs new shoes when customers are dying faster than leather can be cut? Tailors fold away their needles. Carpenters close their shutters. Smithies go cold. Even beggars vanish from street corners because the city itself is one giant beggar, desperate for breath. And worship, the central pulse of medieval life, twists under plague's grip. Churches swell with frantic crowds when fear peaks, then empty again when people decide that gathering together only spreads death faster. Candles burn constantly before statues of saints. Sebastian, pierced by arrows, becomes a favorite intercessor, believed to shield against invisible darts of disease. Pilgrims crawl on their knees to shrines, muttering desperate promises. Some processions grow wild, men and women crying aloud, whipping themselves with scourges to show God their repentance. Inside homes, life shrinks to survival. Families eat together in silence, eyes fixed on whoever coughs first. Mothers pace beside their children, counting breaths, pressing damp cloths to fevered brows, knowing it is useless, but unable to stop. Fathers leave in the morning to scavenge supplies, returning at dusk with whatever scraps can be found. Sometimes they don't return at all. You walk through one such home, the floor strewn with rushes, now sour with the smell of urine and sweat, a fire smoldering low in the hearth, casting orange light on pale faces. A grandmother lies in one corner, her lips whispering prayers. A young boy scratches at a swelling on his neck, his eyes glazed. The room is heavy with dread. You don't linger long. Yet not everyone hides. Some people deciding that death is inevitable embrace pleasure instead. Taverns fill with reckless laughter, mugs slamming against tables, the sour reek of ale sloshing onto floors, sticky with spilled drink. Musicians play frantic tunes, couples dance close, ignoring coughs that break the rhythm. If tomorrow means death, why not feast tonight? The Decameron, written by Giovanni Boccaccio in this very Florence, tells of young nobles retreating to the countryside to tell each other stories, turning their exile into a carnival of tales, real or imagined. It captures that paradox. When life grows shorter, pleasure grows louder. But the majority of people do not feast, they endure. They rise in the morning, check for fevers, search for food, bury their dead, repeat every small action. Baking bread, fetching water, tending livestock, feels weighted with uncertainty. Will the baker collapse? Will the well be contaminated? Will the cow die before morning? Children notice too. Once carefree, they now watch their parents with wide, silent eyes, sensing dread without words. They stop their games, trade laughter for whispers. Their world shrinks to the size of a sick room. You can almost feel the loss of innocence, as if childhood itself is withering alongside the adults. And you wandering these streets, tasting the metallic tang in the air, hearing the silence between bells, realize that daily life hasn't merely been disrupted, it has been unmade. The ordinary patterns that give life meaning, work, prayer, meals, play, have collapsed. What remains is a raw, stripped down existence. Wait, watch, hope. A civilization built on rhythm now staggers on broken time. You kneel on the cold flagstones of a small chapel, the air thick with incense that only half masks the smell of sweat and sickness clinging to the bodies huddled inside. In times of terror, people turn where they always have, to God. Every cough, every tolling bell, every shutter nailed shut drives the faithful to their knees. And yet, in 1338, faith doesn't bring the comfort it once did. It multiplies in strange, frantic directions. Priests preach that the plague is divine punishment, the wrath of heaven, for the sins of mankind. Some point to greed, others to vanity, others to the corruption of rulers. A few single out women, declaring their immodesty has stirred God's anger. Congregations murmur in agreement, desperate for a target, any target that makes sense of the chaos. The sermons grow darker, repent or perish. You join a procession winding through Florence's streets. Torches flicker against stone walls, banners flutter with images of saints, and voices rise in chants that echo between shuttered windows. At the front march the flagellants, men stripped to the waist, whipping their own backs with knotted cords until blood spatters the cobbles. Their chants boom with conviction. Miserere, mei Deus. Have mercy on me, O God. The crowd falls silent, half in awe, half in horror. The lashes crack louder than prayers, as if punishment must be visible to be heard by heaven. Some people find hope in relics. In Avignon, the Pope blesses the Rhone River itself, declaring that anyone who drinks from it with faith may be spared. Pilgrims flock with cups and jars, crowding the banks. Elsewhere, bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, even vials of holy dust are carried through towns. You see peasants pressing forward to touch them, whispering their children's names into the air, as though the relic might remember. And then there is scapegoating. When prayers don't halt the deaths, suspicion sharpens into accusation. Whispers spread. The plague is caused by poisoned wells, by secret plots, by the sins of hidden others. Jews become the most frequent targets, their communities accused of bringing pestilence through sorcery or malice. In Basel, Strasbourg, and other cities, entire Jewish neighborhoods are set upon, their residents driven out, imprisoned, or slaughtered. Fires blaze where synagogues once stood, the smell of burning wood and flesh mingling with the ever-present stench of death. You watch in stunned silence as fear twists into cruelty, faith curdling into violence. But even outside scapegoating, religion shapes daily reactions. Priests urge confession, and queues stretch outside churches. People mutter hurried prayers, terrified of dying unshriven. The sacrament becomes a race against death itself. Friars move from house to house, carrying the Eucharist in trembling hands, sometimes collapsing before they finish their route. One friar jokes weakly that he now spends more time with corpses than the living, and then dies 2 days later. Not everyone finds solace in piety. Some grow bitter, accusing the church of corruption and cowardice. Bishops flee their dioceses, abbots lock monastery gates, priests vanish from villages. The people left behind murmur that God has abandoned them, or that his chosen shepherds care only for themselves. Cynicism creeps in, silent but sharp. Still, for many, religion is the only language that makes sense of the incomprehensible. The plague is God's scourge, a test, a cleansing fire. Families kneel together, their prayers overlapping like waves, pleading for mercy, for forgiveness, for one more dawn without sickness. Candles gutter in windows, flames, tiny but stubborn, symbols of hope burning in the suffocating dark. You realize, sitting in that chapel, that religion during plague is not one thing. It is everything at once. Comfort, terror, violence, ritual, doubt. It's incense in the air and whips on bare backs. It's relics, kissed and neighbors burned. It's a mother whispering a lullaby as a prayer because no words are left. Faith is stretched, broken, reforged under plague's shadow. And whether it heals or harms depends entirely on who wields it. You open the crooked wooden door of a small house, and the air inside is heavy, thick with the scent of sickness, sweat, and stale bread left untouched on a table. Families once sat here together at supper, laughing, gossiping, sharing bowls of stew. Now, daily life has shrunk into whispered decisions about who will stay, who will leave, and who will be left behind. When plague enters a household, bonds that once seemed unbreakable strain under fear. A mother who has nursed children through fevers all her life hesitates now because she knows that tending one sick child may doom the rest. A husband keeps distance from his wife's bed, telling himself it's prudence, not cowardice. You watch as a daughter, no more than 14, clutches her father's sleeve while he debates whether to carry her sick younger brother outside the city before contagion spreads. In that moment, love and terror battle silently across his face. Many families choose separation. Parents lock ill children in back rooms, sliding food under doors, praying they'll recover without contact. Some abandon the sick entirely, fleeing their homes for the countryside. Chroniclers speak of mothers who left infants at roadside chapels, fathers who vanished to save themselves. Each man thought only of himself, one Florentine writer laments, and abandoned his neighbors, his kin, his children. And yet, not all bonds break. Some cling tighter. You hear stories of wives lying beside dying husbands until both succumb, of children refusing to leave a mother's side, of siblings sharing a straw mattress, even as bobos swell between them. In these moments, fear cannot silence love. One Venetian diarist records a girl who stayed by her brother's bedside, cooling his brow with cloths, though she must have known what it meant. Within the week, both were dead. The most common sound in these homes is weeping, not loud sobs, but low, exhausted crying that never quite ends. A family member dies, and there is no time for mourning, only the grim necessity of burial. If another falls sick, the tears start again, until the entire household becomes a well of grief. Practical problems add to the torment. Who tends the fire if everyone is sick? Who fetches water from the well or bread from the market? A single healthy person might keep a family alive for a week or two, but if they fall ill, the house collapses in on itself. You step past one such doorway. Inside, 3 bodies lie on straw pallets, unmoving, while a dog scratches at the door, whining for food. No one answers. Even outside, family ties fray. Extended kin, uncles, cousins, grandparents, refuse to take in the sick, knowing it could doom their own households. The bonds of blood, once the safety net of medieval life, suddenly feel like chains that drag everyone into the same grave. And yet, stories of sacrifice survive too. A Parisian tale speaks of a father who carried his sick son on his back from house to house, begging for medicine, refusing to abandon him, even as neighbors fled. Another, from Siena, tells of sisters who dug their parents' graves themselves when no one else would come. Such tales shine like tiny candles in the gloom, reminders that even in fear, humanity flickers on. But for most, plague turned the family hearth, once the warmest place in life, into the coldest battlefield of all. Every cough at the dinner table becomes a death sentence. Every fevered forehead divides loyalty from survival. And you, sitting on the edge of one such straw mattress, feel the impossible weight pressing on medieval families to stay and risk death together, or to leave and live with the guilt forever. You trudge along a muddy road, leading out of the city, your boots heavy with clay, the air carrying the faint smell of wood, smoke from distant cottages. Behind you lies the cramped chaos of Florence, Venice, and Marseille, cities where narrow alleys and packed houses choke with sickness. Ahead lies the countryside, green fields rolling towards small villages, scattered farmsteads, and manor houses. At first glance, it feels like safety. The air is fresher, the space wider, the silence broken only by birdsong and the creak of cartwheels. But plague doesn't care for scenery. It finds both city and field. In urban centers, the devastation is immediate and visible. Streets overflow with refuse. In rats, families live stacked atop one another, breathing the same foul air. The disease leaps house to house with merciless speed. Entire neighborhoods collapse in days, coffins run short, and bodies line the edges of piazzas until carts rumble by to carry them off. You walk through a deserted square. In Siena, the windows of surrounding houses dark, the silence broken only by the flutter of pigeons. It feels as if the city itself has stopped breathing. Rural areas tell a slower story. Villages sometimes go weeks before the disease arrives, spared by their isolation. Farmers glance anxiously at the horizon, wondering if strangers will bring doom. When sickness does strike, it spreads less explosively, one family, then another. But here, survival carries its own cruelty. Fields go unplowed, sheep untended, harvests abandoned, grain rots in barns while families lie in their beds. You pass a farmstead where chickens wander freely, the yard untended, doors swinging open. Inside, silence. The plague has visited here, and the land itself lies fallow with grief. The contrast grows starker when you consider food. In cities, hunger grows because supplies cannot reach markets. In villages, the opposite happens. Food rots because no one remains to eat it. One English chronicle later records sheep roaming like lords of the land, wandering unshorn, unclaimed, because their shepherds are dead. It's a bitter joke, nature thriving while humans perish. Still, the countryside offers something the city cannot escape. Nobles and the wealthy retreat to rural villas, seeking refuge in fresh air and distance. Boccaccio's young storytellers in the Decameron flee Florence for country estates, distracting themselves with songs and tales while the city burns with death. Yet, even there, plague sometimes follows, carried by a servant, a visitor, or the invisible fleas clinging to grain sacks. Safety proves temporary, at best. Religion, too, takes different shapes. In cities, processions thunder with crowds, priests chanting through incense. In villages, piety is quieter, a family kneeling before a roadside cross, a parish priest ringing his bell over empty pews. One rural chronicle tells of villagers who tied candles to their cattle's horns, driving the beasts in circles around fields in hopes of scaring away the sickness. A strange ritual, but no stranger than the self-flagellance in urban squares. Economically, the divide is sharp. Cities bleed coin, their markets stalled, merchants ruined. In villages, coin hardly matters anymore. Survival depends on hands to till the soil, and when those hands fall idle, the village collapses. A manor may boast fertile acres, but if its peasants die, its wealth vanishes into weeds. You pass one such estate, its fields sprouting unchecked, its lord pacing the walls in helplessness. And there's the question of burial. In cities, corpses pile high, carted en masse to pits outside the walls. In villages, burials are simpler. Family graves dug behind churches, small plots, hurriedly filled. Yet, when entire households fall, neighbors must decide whether to dig graves or walk away. Sometimes they do neither, leaving houses to collapse into themselves, the dead inside forgotten till the weeds reclaim them. The plague's face, then, is not uniform. In cities, it is sudden collapse, deafening and crowded. In villages, it is slower unraveling, quieter, but no less final. You, standing between both worlds, see clearly, no matter where you flee, crowded piazza or lonely field, the Black Death knows the way. You stand at the gates of a walled city, the iron hinges straight with rust, the wooden planks reinforced hastily with beams. Guards in patched surcoats hold halberds, their faces pale with fear rather than authority. Word has spread that the plague approaches, and governments, whether councils of merchants, noble lords, or city syndics, scramble to respond. Quarantine, the word whispered now, is born of desperation. Quarantine journey 40 days of enforced isolation for ships arriving from infected ports. It's an idea Venice will make infamous, but here in 1348 it is only just beginning to take shape. At the docks of Ragusa on the Dalmatian coast, officials order incoming sailors to remain offshore, their ships bobbing like floating prisons. You watch the men waving desperately from the decks, begging for food, for water, for release. But the city knows to let them ashore is to invite death into its streets. So grain and supplies are ferried out on small skiffs, and the sailors wait, coughing, while gulls circle overhead. It's one of the first attempts at quarantine, though no one yet knows if 40 days is long enough to outwait the unseen enemy. Spoiler, it isn't always. Inside city walls, governments pass frantic decrees. In Milan, officials respond with brutal efficiency. When plague is found in a house, the authorities seal the doors with heavy boards and nails, trapping both the sick and the healthy inside until all are dead. The hammering echoes through alleys, the cries from within muffled by timber. It's harsh, but Milan suffers fewer deaths than its neighbors. Proof, perhaps, that terror sometimes works. Elsewhere, measures falter. In Florence, the city council debates endlessly, but decisions arrive slower than the plague. They order waste removed, fires burned in the streets to purify the air. Strangers watched, yet corpses still pile high, and magistrates themselves begin to die, leaving chaos in their wake. In Avignon, Pope Clement VI issues bulls granting absolution to all who die of plague. So, overwhelmed is the church's machinery of last rites, civil order bends beneath the weight of death. Markets are regulated in strange ways. In some towns, butchers are forbidden to slaughter animals near dwellings. In others, fishmongers are required to clean stalls twice daily. Barbers accused of spreading disease with their lances and razors are restricted in their work. Officials ban dice games, dancing, even taverns, arguing that frivolity offends God during crisis. The irony, of course, is that taverns remain crowded anyway. Fear and drink go hand in hand. Then comes the attempt at control by movement. Some cities forbid outsiders from entering entirely, erecting guards on every gate. Travelers arrive with bundles on their backs, only to be turned away into the countryside. You watch one such group, merchants with wagons of wool, argue furiously at the gates of Pisa. The guards shrug, point their halberds outward. Better to starve than to sicken, they reason. The merchants curse and trudge away, their livelihoods collapsing along with their patience. But plague slips past every barrier. Rats do not respect decrees. Fleas do not heed nailed doors. Fear and suspicion spread faster than any government order. In Venice, magistrates establish plague houses where the infected are corralled. The rooms reek of sweat and smoke, the moans of the dying leaking out into canals. Officials call it containment. Citizens call it a waiting room for death. The most lasting invention, though, remains the quarantine. Cities across Italy, then across Europe, adopt the practice. Ships forced to wait offshore, travelers held in lazarettos outside the walls, goods fumigated in smoke before sale. You watch bales of cloth hung on racks above fires, the wool scorched and ruined, the merchant weeping as his fortune goes up in smoke. It feels primitive, clumsy, but in time, it becomes standard practice, shaping public health for centuries. Governments may not understand the plague's cause, but they understand its threat. Their responses are uneven, sometimes cruel, sometimes comical, sometimes quietly brilliant. And as you pass through yet another city gate, hearing orders barked by weary officials, you see the truth. No decree can hold back what has already slipped through every crack. The Black Death obeys no council, no magistrate, no pope. You walk out to the edge of a city's burial ground, and what you see is not order, not quiet rows of graves marked with crosses, but chaos. The ground is churned into mud from the constant trampling of carts and spades. The smell hits first, a thick, sour stench of rot and lime, carried on the wind so strongly it clings to your throat. Crows gather in black flocks overhead, swooping down to peck at loose scraps before frightened workers chase them away. In the early days, families tried to bury their loved ones properly. Priests led processions, candles flickered, hymns echoed across small graveyards. But soon, the sheer number of dead overwhelms every ritual. Coffins run out, shovels splinter. The clergy themselves begin to die. You see men struggling to dig trenches wide enough to swallow dozens at a time. Bodies are stacked like cordwood, covered hastily with thin layers of earth, only for more corpses to arrive before the soil settles. Chroniclers speak of pits in Florence so vast that hundreds were dumped in a single day. In Avignon, the Rhone River itself is pressed into service. Bodies floated downstream, sometimes half burned, sometimes not at all. In London, the city will eventually open vast plague pits at Smithfield and Charterhouse, holes yawning wide to receive the endless stream of carts. The sound of shovels never stops. You watch one such cart rattle through a narrow street, its wheels squeaking under the weight of wrapped forms. The driver covers his mouth with a cloth, muttering a prayer as he calls for the living to bring out your dead. A door creaks open, and two men shuffle out carrying a body between them. It's their father, his limbs bound in cloth, his face hidden. They lift him wordlessly onto the pile. The cart creaks onward, leaving silence behind. The living are forced to adapt. In some towns, gravediggers refuse to work unless paid outrageous sums, risking their lives daily. Others collapse into the pits themselves too, exhausted to climb out. In Siena, where art and beauty once flourished, chroniclers record that the city became without bells, without tears, without mourning. The dead were dumped without names, without prayers, without dignity. You notice how burials fracture society. The wealthy, at first, insist on private graves, lavish ceremonies, priests chanting over incense, but eventually, even noble coffins are burned or tossed into common pits. Death levels all distinctions, kings, bishops, peasants, beggars. When the plague cart comes, all ride together. Still, some households cling desperately to ritual. You see a mother kneeling by a shallow grave she dug herself, whispering over the small body she lowered in, marking the spot with a crude wooden cross. Her hands are blistered, her face streaked with tears, but she will not let her child vanish, nameless into a pit. These tiny acts of defiance, the cross, the whispered prayer, become last fragments of humanity in a world stripped bare. Even the earth rebels. In summer heat, shallow graves swell, the soil cracking, bones and cloth poking back into the air. Dogs and rats dig at the edges. The stench becomes unbearable, driving survivors further into the countryside. Some villages abandon their graveyards entirely, leaving fields of the dead behind as silent markers of despair. The constant presence of burial reshapes the rhythm of life. Each dawn begins with the rumble of carts. Each dusk ends with the muffled thud of earth hitting wood or flesh. Children grow up not with lullabies, but with the scrape of shovels in their ears. You lie awake at night and realize, in this time, the line between the living and the dead is measured not by years or even days, but by the strength of your next breath. And still, the pits keep filling. No amount of soil is deep enough, no number of prayers long enough to cover the enormity of death. The ground itself seems to sag under the weight of bodies, and as you stand on its edge, the lime stinging your nostrils, you cannot help but feel that Europe itself has become one vast grave. You walk through the market square of a once proud town, and everything feels off kilter. The stalls are half empty, shutters creak in the wind, and the usual hum of bargaining voices is replaced by the crack of wood as a door is forced open by desperate hands. Law, order, trust, all the things that knit a society together have frayed into threads. The plague does not only kill bodies, it kills the rules people once lived by. Neighbors eye each other with suspicion. A cough at the well draws glares. A sneeze in the street makes people scatter. Old bonds of trust dissolve, replaced by fear. You watch a woman drop a coin into a baker's palm, only for him to recoil, demanding she place it on the counter instead. He douses it with vinegar before touching it, muttering that silver carries the plague. Trade continues, but it is poisoned by doubt. Crime rises like smoke over smoldering ruins. With guards dead or fled, thieves break into shuttered homes, convinced that jewelry or hidden coin means more than survival. Some even rob the dead, stripping rings from stiff fingers, tugging cloaks from cooling shoulders. Chroniclers record men caught carrying corpses to burial, who pause to rifle through pockets before tossing bodies into pits. One friar calls it the sin of desperation, but you can't help noticing that desperation is everywhere now. Desertion becomes common too. Servants abandon masters. Apprentices slip away from workshops. Soldiers leave posts. Loyalty, once the glue of medieval hierarchy, melts under fear of infection. A nobleman may pace the hall of his manor, furious that none of his servants remain to stoke his fire, while peasants whisper that lords can rot like anyone else. Plague levels the high and the low, but it also erodes obedience itself. Superstition blossoms like weeds, with priests silent, doctors powerless, and officials absent. People grasp for answers anywhere they can. You pass a woman swinging a bundle of herbs over her head, chanting in broken Latin, convinced the ritual will clear her house of miasma. A group of young men scrawl charms on their doors, symbols of crosses, circles, even crude drawings of animals to ward off sickness. Some carry amulets of bone or copper, rubbing them constantly until their fingers blister. It's medicine, faith, and magic all tangled together, born of desperation. Festivities forbidden by councils continue underground. In taverns, you hear songs twisted with black humor, rhymes about blowbos, toasts to beating death at his own game. The laughter is harsh, the jokes crude, but they serve a purpose. When tomorrow is uncertain, a laugh tonight feels like rebellion. And yet, even here, order falters. Fights break out, knives flash, coins vanish in sleight of hand tricks. The tavern keeper shrugs, better chaos indoors than silence in the streets. Fear breeds cruelty. You watch neighbors barricade sick families inside their homes, hammering boards across doors. Some do it out of civic duty, others out of raw terror, unwilling to let disease spread. Sometimes the boarded up families pound on the walls for hours before silence falls. No one removes the boards until the smell seeps out. Even burial becomes corrupted. Families once careful with rights, now dump bodies at crossroads too frightened to wait for carts. One chronicle from Lubeck tells of corpses left outside tavern doors with notes scrawled on parchment. This one owed me a drink. Gallows humor becomes survival. Amidst all this, the rhythm of justice collapses. Courts stop meeting, trials are abandoned, crimes go unpunished, except by mob justice. You watch one accused thief dragged through the streets, beaten not by officials, but by angry neighbors, who scream that his greed has cursed them all. They leave him for dead, and no law answers. And yet, in the cracks of collapse, new bonds sometimes form. Neighbors who once feuded now share food. Guild brothers care for one another when families have vanished. A widow tends a sick stranger, whispering prayers for a man she never knew. Small acts of kindness flare like lanterns in dark alleys. Society may be breaking, but humanity refuses to vanish completely. Still, as you look around, the overwhelming impression is this: rules, customs, faith in authority, all the invisible threads that once held Europe together, snap one by one. What remains is a patchwork of fear, superstition, cruelty, and occasional compassion. The Black Death has not only emptied streets of people, it has emptied them of certainty. You stand at the edge of a tilled field, furrows overgrown with weeds, the plow abandoned mid-row. The silence is startling. No farmers shout, no oxen lowing, no children scattering birds from grain. The Black Death has emptied the land of its hands, and with those hands gone, Europe's economy buckles like a cart with broken wheels. The first effect is labor shortage. So many peasants die that the survivors suddenly find themselves in rare demand. Lords who once barked orders now beg for tenants, offering lighter dues, larger plots, even freedom from old obligations. Imagine that serfdom itself, that ancient chain beginning to weaken under the weight of empty villages. In England, this will later spark laws like the Ordinance of Labours, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Spoiler, good luck enforcing that when half your workforce is in the ground. In cities, craftsmen vanish and workshops shutter. A goldsmith's forge goes cold. A weaver's loom gathers dust. Those who survive can demand higher pay, but customers are few, and goods rot unsold. Trade networks fray. You wander through a marketplace in Paris, half the stalls empty, the rest charging outrageous sums. A sack of grain costs 3 times what it did last year. Salt, iron, wool, all climb in price. Inflation stalks survivors almost as cruelly as disease. Yet, paradoxically, some people grow rich. Merchants who survive inherit competitors' stock, estates, and land. Orphans suddenly control vast fortunes when their families perish, though many die before enjoying it. Inheritance becomes chaotic. Wills are contested, records lost, property transfers like wildfire. A man poor in 1347 may be wealthy by 1350. Not by hard work, but because his cousins are dead. Food supply swings wildly. In some regions, harvests rot because too few hands remain to gather them. In others, fewer mouths mean abundance for survivors, at least temporarily. You taste bread in one town, soft, white, made from finer wheat than peasants once dreamed of eating. Luxury for some, but uneven. In many villages, famine still lurks. Land use shifts. Marginal plots, those hard-to-till patches on hillsides or swamp edges, are abandoned. Forests creep back. Wolves howl closer to settlements. Wild deer wander through what were once fields. Sheep herding grows more common, fewer hands needed, wool fetching high prices. England, especially, will tilt toward sheep, setting the stage for centuries of enclosure and rural transformation. Guilds, once powerful arbiters of trade, stumble, membership plummets, expertise vanishes. Some try to shore up power by forbidding outsiders from entering trades, but desperation often trumps rules. Women, widows especially, step into roles left vacant by husbands running shops, farms, even practicing crafts. Necessity grants them space society once denied. It's a fragile gain, but a gain nonetheless. The church itself, massive landowner and employer, reels financially, with fewer tithes flowing in. Monasteries struggle. Some abbeys lose so many monks that fields lie fallow, libraries empty, cloisters echo. Yet the church also inherits vast estates from childless patrons. That irony bites. While parishes collapse, bishops count coins. The ripple spreads further still. Trade routes across the Mediterranean falter. Venetian galleys sail half-crewed. Genoese merchants lose fortunes. Caravans shrink. Ports once bustling fall eerily quiet. The global web of commerce contracts, and Europe retreats into survival mode. And through it all, you sense a strange shift. Ordinary people realize their worth. A peasant who once bowed low now negotiates wages. A craftsman raises his price, daring anyone to refuse. Even servants bargain, clean a noble's hall, only if paid double. These tiny rebellions accumulate, seeds of social change buried in plague pits. The economy doesn't vanish, it mutates. Shortages, inflation, abandoned lands, new fortunes, higher wages, shifting power. You stand in a silent field, weeds brushing your boots, and realize the Black Death has not only emptied homes, but rewritten the value of every hand, every coin, every acre. Europe's wealth is being redistributed, not by law, not by choice, but by the scythe of death itself. You step into a crowded square in Strasbourg, and the atmosphere feels charged, not with mourning, but with suspicion sharp enough to cut the air. The plague has raged for months, and when prayers, processions, and physicians fail, people turn to blame. Whispers spread like fire in dry thatch. Someone must be causing this. And once the idea takes hold, it doesn't matter how absurd the target. The need for a culprit outweighs reason. The finger points most often at Jewish communities. Rumors spread that Jews poisoned wells with powders or conspired with distant enemies to bring pestilence. In Basel, the story is whispered so widely that by February 1349, mobs stormed the Jewish quarter, herding families into wooden houses and setting them aflame. The flames rise higher than the cathedral spires, carrying screams into the night. Survivors are driven out, their possessions seized, their synagogues demolished. You stand in the ashes the next day, and all that remains is charred timber and silence. This pattern repeats across Europe. In Strasbourg, nearly 2,000 Jews are massacred in one terrible day, their bodies dumped into pits as the mob cheers. In Mainz, Jewish families, trapped in their homes, choose to set their own houses ablaze rather than be slaughtered by neighbors they once traded with. Chroniclers record the horror with a strange calm, as though writing down the weather, and thus they perished. Accusations spread further still. Lepers are accused of carrying poison powders. Foreign travelers are suspected of spreading contagion deliberately. Even beggars and pilgrims are beaten in the streets, accused of consorting with the devil. You watch a group of peasants chase a wandering friar from their village, shouting that his prayers attract demons. Fear needs no evidence. It feeds itself. Authorities sometimes try to intervene. Pope Clement VI issues bulls declaring Jews innocent of causing plague, reminding Christians that they too are dying in vast numbers. But papal ink cannot quell mob rage. Civic leaders, desperate to placate the furious, often turn a blind eye, or worse, lead the persecutions themselves, seizing Jewish property to refill empty treasuries. The line between scapegoating and opportunism blurs until it vanishes. For the accused, choices are bleak. Some convert under duress, baptized at sword point. Others flee to Poland or further east, where rulers keen to attract skilled traders and artisans offer protection. But the trauma of exile and massacre scars communities for generations. Once thriving Jewish quarters lie in ruins, their people scattered like ashes on the wind. And yet, Jews are not the only scapegoats. Women, especially those who live alone or work as midwives, are eyed with suspicion. Old herbal remedies are rebranded as witchcraft. You overhear villagers muttering that a widow's sharp tongue or a healer's bitter potion has cursed the town. Some are beaten, others exiled, a few burned. The plague makes every oddity dangerous, every outsider a threat. Even animals become targets. In some towns, cats are slaughtered en masse, blamed for carrying sickness. Ironically, killing them only worsens the rat problem, feeding the cycle of death. You walk through alleys where carcasses of cats are piled like refuse, the smell of decay mingling with the ever-present odor of human loss. The cruelest irony is this: while mobs rage against supposed culprits, the true carriers, the fleas, the rats, go unnoticed, scuttling freely underfoot. Hatred blinds more effectively than ignorance alone. Standing in that Strasbourg Square, you sense how fear twists into violence. People who once bought bread from Jewish bakers, who once nodded to lepers at wells, now turn murderers overnight. The plague strips away not only life, but trust itself. Europe fractures, scapegoats sacrificed on the altar of survival. And you realize the Black Death kills in two ways: by the swell of booboos, and by the hands of neighbors who cannot endure their own terror without destroying someone else. You wander into a scriptorium. The long wooden tables cluttered with ink pots, parchment, and half-finished manuscripts. The usual hum of copying, the scratch of quills, the murmur of monks reciting lines to themselves is eerily absent. Only a few remain, their heads bent low, writing furiously, as if words alone can trap memory before it slips into silence. For the Black Death is not just an event to endure, it becomes something people must record, paint, sing, and remember, if only to make sense of what has happened. Chroniclers across Europe set their pens to parchment. In Florence, Giovanni Boccaccio begins the Decameron, a collection of tales framed by a group of young nobles fleeing to the countryside. His introduction paints a chilling picture of the city itself. Corpses in the streets, families abandoned, social bonds shattered. He turns tragedy into backdrop, laughter into survival. It is a paradox, art born from death, comedy stitched onto calamity. In Siena, the chronicler Agnoladitura, the fat, writes bluntly, "Without poetry, I buried my 5 children with my own hands. So many died that all believed it was the end of the world." His words carry no embellishment, only the raw weight of grief. Other chroniclers echo him, notes of horror, disbelief, and resignation, recorded in every tongue from Castilian to Latin to Middle English. Artists capture the trauma with brush and pigment. Frescoes in Pisa and Naples depict skeletons dancing beside nobles, a grim reminder that no wealth or power shields one from death. These dense macabre images will spread across Europe, skeletal processions winding through manuscripts, murals, and carvings, hammering home the lesson: death is universal, impartial, and now impossible to ignore. Songs to emerge, grim nursery rhymes whispered by children, darkly playful refrains that survive centuries later. In the Netherlands, you hear verses mocking the futility of medicine. In France, songs lament vanished lovers. Memory seeps into culture, not only as solemn record, but as morbid humor, humanity's attempt to lighten despair by turning it into rhyme. Religious art bends with the times. Saint Sebastian, once a minor saint, pierced by arrows, becomes a favorite protector. Arrows reinterpreted as symbols of plague striking from heaven. Saint Roch, said to have survived plague himself, is painted with a bubo on his thigh, his suffering transformed into intercession. Churches fill with new altars, frescoes, statues, visual cries for mercy frozen in wood and stone. Literature takes on darker tones. Themes of vanity, mortality, and divine judgment dominate sermons and plays. Writers warn of life's fragility, of wealth's emptiness, of time's brevity. The plague doesn't invent these ideas, but it magnifies them, carving them deep into the imagination of a generation. The medieval obsession with death, skulls carved into tombs, memento mori etched into margins, flowers grotesquely under the Black Death's shadow. And yet, even in its gloom, cultural memory preserves resilience. The very act of writing, painting, singing becomes resistance. Chroniclers know they may die before finishing, but they write anyway. Artists who have lost families still lift brushes. Children still rhyme plague into songs. Each act is a way of saying, we were here, and we endured. Centuries later, when you read these chronicles, gaze at these frescoes, hum these tunes, you can feel their voices reaching across time, not only telling you what happened, but how it felt. The smell of incense in empty churches, the sight of skeletons painted on walls, the sound of bells tolling endlessly, all carried forward in ink, paint, and melody. And so, the Black Death lingers, not just in bones beneath the soil, but in the cultural memory etched into Europe's soul. Every fresco, every chronicle, every grim joke whispers the same lesson. Remember us, because forgetting would kill us twice. You stand at the crest of a hill, overlooking a valley dotted with villages, and what strikes you most is not the noise of life, but the quiet of absence. Entire hamlets lie still, their fields overgrown, their cottages sagging under collapsed thatch. The Black Death has cut so deep into Europe's flesh that the scars are demographic, visible, not just in numbers but in empty spaces, where people should be. Before plague, Europe's population had swelled, pressing hard against the limits of farmland and food. By 1347, perhaps 80 million souls lived across the continent. By 1351, one-third, maybe even half, were gone. That means tens of millions vanished in 4 short years. You walk through the silence and realize this is not just a catastrophe of lives, but of generations. Inheritance laws buckle under the strain. When entire households perish, property cascades outward through extended kin or falls into the hands of the church and local lords. A young woman may suddenly inherit a farm, only to die weeks later, passing it again. Records become a chaos of crossed-out names and uncertain claims. Some families rise unexpectedly in fortune. Others disappear entirely, their lineages ending in shallow graves. Marriage patterns shift. With fewer people, widows and widowers remarry quickly, blending families in ways unthinkable before. Daughters who once might have been married off cheaply now become valuable matches, courted with higher dowries. Sons inherit sooner, sometimes at shockingly young ages, because no elders remain. The cycle of family life, birth, marriage, death, warps under the pressure of plague. The workforce thins drastically. In villages, fields lie untilled. In towns, workshops stay shuttered. Survivors demand higher wages, sometimes moving freely in search of better offers. Lords and governments bristle. In England, the Statute of Labour's 1351 tries to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, ordering peasants to accept the same pay as before. But with half the workforce gone, enforcement proves impossible. Peasants walk away from manors emboldened to claim freedom, setting the stage for uprisings like the English Peasants' Revolt decades later. Demographic collapse also alters land use. Marginal farmland, rocky hillsides, marshy ground gets abandoned. Forests creep back. Wolves prowl closer, wild boar root in deserted orchards. In some places, entire villages vanish, their names surviving only in charters. You can still walk through parts of Europe today and stumble on ruined churches, surrounded by nothing but trees, ghosts of settlements, the plague erased. The urban landscape changes too, with fewer inhabitants. Houses stand empty, rents fall, and poorer families move into homes once reserved for the wealthy. Space itself shifts downward. Aristocratic mansions carved into tenements. In some towns, the sudden abundance of vacant property fuels rebuilding. Streets are widened, walls repaired, even public works funded by the estates of the dead. Out of catastrophe, cities reshape themselves. Fewer mouths to feed mean diets improve for survivors. Meat, once rare for peasants, becomes more common. Grain stretches further. Wine flows more cheaply. You taste a meal of roasted mutton and realize this feast is born not of prosperity, but of absence. Every bite is a reminder of those not present to eat it. Population decline also reshapes military strength. Armies shrink, castles stand half empty. Some wars stall because neither side can muster men, yet conflict never vanishes. Humans have a way of finding reasons to fight even when death stalks them. Still, the plague alters the balance, weakening kingdoms, empowering others, tilting history's scales in unexpected ways. The demographic crater will not refill quickly. It takes centuries for Europe's population to recover to its pre-plague height. In the meantime, everything marriage, inheritance, wages, diets, wars is colored by absence. You stand on that hill, gazing at the half-abandoned valley, and the truth settles heavy in your chest. The Black Death did not merely kill individuals, it erased whole futures, whole possibilities, leaving behind a smaller, stranger Europe reshaped by loss. You wander slowly through the quiet streets of a city that has survived the first waves of plague, though survived feels like the wrong word. The walls still stand, the bells still ring, but the people who once filled the squares are fewer, their footsteps echoing in spaces too wide for them now. Shops reopen hesitantly, markets stir back to life. Yet every sound carries a hollow undertone, as if the city itself is whispering about those who are missing. The aftermath is not just silence. It is a Europe altered forever. Governments attempt to patch order back together, scribbling new laws, reorganizing courts, recalculating taxes on drastically reduced populations. Priests preach of lessons learned, humility, repentance, the fleeting nature of earthly things. Chroniclers set quills to parchment to ensure memory is not lost, and yet, beneath the sermons and the laws, you sense the deeper truth. People are different now. They have seen too much to return to what was. Communities rebuild, but not as before. With fewer people, opportunities expand. A farmhand becomes a tenant farmer. The tenant becomes a landowner. Social mobility, once frozen by rigid hierarchies, begins to thaw. Some lords curse this, clinging desperately to their waning control, while others adapt, realizing that survival now depends on negotiation, not domination. You hear voices in taverns, peasants talking more boldly, women handling accounts, guilds reconsidering membership. Change ripples outward, like a stone dropped in still water. Religion, though, shaken, weaves itself tighter into daily life. Survivors see themselves as chosen, spared by divine will. Pilgrimages flourish, relic cults expand, and churches fill again, though always with a shadow of doubt lingering behind prayers. Faith has been tested, sometimes broken, sometimes reforged stronger. Out of plague rises both cynicism and renewed devotion, side by side. Culture carries memory forward. The danse macabre spreads across murals and manuscripts, skeletons dancing hand in hand with popes, kings, and peasants alike. The lesson is unavoidable. Death is the great equalizer. Writers echo it, from Boccaccio's tales of laughter amid death to somber chronicles of villages erased. Art and literature pulse with the rhythm of mortality, ensuring that the horror of these years will never be forgotten. Yet life does not remain grief alone. New children are born, their cries echoing through streets that once heard only silence. Fields are tilled again, sheep graze pastures once abandoned, and laughter, tentative at first, returns to taverns. The Black Death has carved wounds deep into Europe, but scars do not mean endings. They mean survival. And now, as the narrative slows, your breathing steadies. Imagine yourself at the close of day, standing in a field where the sun sets behind half-abandoned cottages. The air is cool, carrying the scent of turned soil and distant wood smoke. Birds wheel above, their cries sharp and alive. In the hush, you realize that, though millions perished, life continues. Not unchanged, not unscarred, but still stubbornly present. The wind drifts through tall grass, whispering over stones that mark forgotten graves. You let the sound wash over you, gentle and steady. Each blade of grass bends, rises, bends again. A rhythm as old as time. And in that rhythm, you hear reassurance. What was broken does not vanish. What was lost is remembered. What was ended makes space for what begins. So breathe slowly. The bells have quieted. The plague carts have rolled away. The streets, though thinner of life, are yours to walk. Close your eyes and let the weight of centuries dissolve. Let the final whisper of the story settle soft in your chest. The knock has passed. The door is closed, and night has brought you safely here. Good night, sweet dreams.